Welcome to Healthy Exchange. This is an exploration into subjective well-being and our relationships with each other. And this year I'm trying to bring in a little bit more of an emphasis on leadership as well. So I hope you see yourself in this conversation at some point in your current, past, or future life, and have an opportunity to really think about what this conversation means in your life. The conversation we're having today is about mental health in the workplace. And Dr. Deb is an Amazon best-selling author. She's an award-winning scholar practitioner and the founder of a peer support community and podcast called PTSD and Beyond, which were both launched to provide advocacy, support, and resources, as well as hope, inspiration, education, empowerment, and growth to everyone affected by and with post-traumatic stress disorder. Dr. Deb holds a doctorate in organizational psychology development and consults with businesses and organizations on operations and strategy, always through the lens of trauma awareness, mental health advocacy, and mindfulness. So welcome, Dr. Deb.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jill.
I like to start each Healthy Exchange with the same question of all of my guests, which you are free to interpret however you'd like. And that is, what does health and well-being mean to you?
That's an interesting question because it's a personalized question. I get asked this question when I'm talking with leaders in organizations. And sometimes I think that leaders want me to give them a definition that they can then go and use within their organization. But what I find is that it's personalized. So when I'm doing this work, whether it's in peer support, I'm providing peer support or providing support to myself, well-being is an individual's perception. And that's where, when we have the phrase of meeting a person where they're at, in order to provide trauma-informed support, I need to meet people with where they're at and their meaning of well-being, which also makes it very complicated sometimes in organizations to provide those services, because one thing might be attractive to an individual and that same service might not resonate with somebody else.
Might actually bother someone, like be like they don't want it.
Correct. Exactly. When I think about well-being for myself, I think of my whole person. So, and I'm not trying to speak of myself in the third person. I mean, we could if we wanted to, that would be a little bit fun. It is my mental well-being, my emotional well-being, my physical well-being, my spiritual well-being, my energetic well-being, the person that I am as Deborah, the person that I am as the inner child, the person that I am as a mother, the person that I am as a community member, the person that I am as a leader, and then also the person that I am as a legacy, because I believe that well-being is part of what we do today. And how does it sustain for tomorrow? I mean, with, my kids, with other people that I meet, even here right now, we're going to be together for a little bit of time, but our interaction with each other can be sustainable. There might be something that is said, maybe in a chat comment, or maybe something that I say or Jill says that really speaks to you, that you might even say like, oh, I've heard this before, but it's the way that I heard it today. And that's actually a really common piece of feedback that we get in our peer group, and then also the work that I do.
It's really interesting. And it's something that we've talked a lot when you were talking about the personalized nature of health and well-being. That's something that we talk about here as well. What is of value to me from my personal health and well-being is going to be completely different than what's of value to you.
Right.
So,
and the other piece that's important too is that while there are differences, hearing someone else's story can also be inspiring, not motivating. Okay, motivation is a temporary emotion. Inspiration is something that speaks to your heart. It speaks to you on a deeper level that says, you know what, I'd like to experience that also. One of the things that I want to share with the group is how I started in mental wellness and working with peer support, specifically with post-traumatic stress, is from my personal story and my experience. So I'm an advocate as well as a person with lived experience of trauma. which is, I think it makes it a deeper relationship from a perspective of why is it so important? We talk about what does wellness mean? It is an essential part of my being. It's not something that's temporary or I'm going to do it today or tomorrow. When we connect with each other through storytelling, again, there might be something that resonates, whether right now in this moment, and also maybe 2 weeks down the road, you may say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I heard, that's right. I heard that on, Jill's session. And I remember that woman came on and she was talking about this.
Awesome. Thank you. I do want to get your sense about the workplace. I know that you're going in as a consultant and working with people, looking to for a lot of things, business strategy and operations overall, but specifically through the lens of mental health in the workplace. I'm curious what you are seeing when it comes to companies recognizing the need for this, hearing the demand from their associates, and what they're able to do to address the mental health of their employees.
A lot of questions right there.
Yeah,
the one thing that I'm most happy with is that the conversations are moving from we're going to think about it and then tabling it. We have all experienced that working as solopreneurs where, an organization wants to talk about change and then they do something and then that initiative gets on the shelf and then they're off doing something else. What I'm happy to see is that there's a sustainability with the conversation, and the conversations is more than, what exactly is this? What I'm hearing is I want to understand what it is. So instead of coming from the lens of what is it, they're asking questions of, I want to understand more. And when I first did my master's work was at St. Kate's, and it was looking at best practices in the workplace. And then my doctoral studies it was an applied study of employee stress. So we've moved from it's there and I'm going to ignore it to I know that it's there and I don't really know what it's about, to I know it's there. I may not know what it's about, and I'm taking action to try to understand more about it and how does it affect people within my organization. As a solopreneur, there are things that we can look at when we're working within our clients' organizations to identify what is the health pulse of this organization. How healthy is the organization? What are the things that we're seeing? Are we seeing people that are stressed out? How are they showing, that they are maybe exhibiting mental health challenges? So if you take a class, for example, and become a mental health first aider, one of the things that we can look for example, is when we're having a team meeting, is how present are people? Are they distracted? Are they fidgeting? Do they appear to be anxious when asking them direct questions? How long does it take them to respond? Do they repeat themselves? So there are things that we can look for. And then we can also provide value added services to the organizations as a solopreneur of when you're delivering the services to make sure that what you're doing creates a safe space for people to do that work with you. So the conversations are more frequent. I mean, last week I had 9 different conversations with corporate leaders. And while I was preparing for a conversation today, Jill, I thought to myself, okay, statistically, 1 in 4 people have a mental health challenge. Now that's underreported because that data comes from people that actually go to a general practitioner, some place of a wellness where it's reported back to, you send a little thing, can I, your form, can I use this information for data collection? Yes, right? So 1 in 4. So out of those 9 conversations, that means that 2 individuals out of 9, 2 of them experience a mental health challenge.
Are you seeing, given there are lots of individual and personal reasons why someone would have a mental health challenge that they're dealing with in the work environment, but there are also some cultural things and shifts that have been happening over the last several years between the pandemic and everything that we're seeing in our news. Are you seeing common threads across organizations when it comes to the specific mental health challenges that people are facing?
That's a good question because that actually came up last week with one leader. They had the impression that mental health challenges were situational. When we were talking about trauma, for example, or how does a person develop anxiety? What are the root causes? And so it's complicated because there isn't any one cause of something. For example, with post-traumatic stress, I've had people say this, isn't that a veterans thing? Actually, no, it's not. Trauma can be experienced through situational, like 9/11, as well as chronic or complex, which is something that is rooted from domestic violence and child abuse. So it's multiple situations that a person has experienced. It's not one particular situation. So I think that getting back to the question is it's not a singular answer. And again, when we meet people with where they're at, there's a question that we can ask. There's many questions we can ask. One question when we notice something is, I notice that something's a little off, or I notice that you're behaving a little differently, or I notice that you're exhibiting, let's just say you're fidgeting a lot. I notice that you're fidgeting a lot. Is there something that I can help with? Instead of saying like, what happened to you, the to you piece, I really don't like that. I know there's a book by Oprah, it's What Happened to You. In the trauma world, I can tell you right now that phrase, that question is very reactive. It doesn't provide a safe space because the person personalizes the to you. Instead, when we ask the question, what happened? And then you stop talking and you listen. A person might actually say, this makes me nervous because I've had a past experience with a previous boss that ended up yelling at me. And I always get anxious when I have to do these kinds of tasks. It causes me so much stress and anxiety. So previous experiences in the workplace can also amplify and emulate traumatic symptoms. Insomnia, that's a traumatic symptom. Anxiety, hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is the rumination. I'm thinking about the same thing over and over again, and I'm so concerned and so worried, and they're playing that tape over and over again to themselves. Hypervigilance is another one. I'm looking around and scanning all my team members to make sure nobody's angry with me. Does anybody look like they're angry with me? Does anybody look like they're unhappy with me, with my work? It's so personalized. So in organizations, what we can do is we can look at general practices, but organizations, before they start delivering solutions, need to ask more questions and do a discovery of what's there. Why do we want to even do this? Another question is, if we don't want to do it, why not? There are organizations right now that are like the wait and see. We all know, right? As practitioners, we know the three groups of, the change, right? The three responses. Some organizations are proactive. They're the first ones on the bus. Yep, they're driving the bus or creating the bus. They've invented the bus. They're the trailblazers.
Yeah.
Right. Then you got the wait and see people, the middle people. I'm going to wait and see what, the proactives do. We're going to wait and see what happens. And eventually either they're going to move or they're going to stay with the other group, which is we're never going to do anything. And what is the risk, though, of not doing anything? The risk of not doing anything, and we also see another cycle in business, is someone else is going to do it bigger, better, faster at some point.
Well, and there's that statistic that we talked about, I think it was in the American Psychological Association, that 81% of people in the workforce are actually looking, when they look for their next job, they're looking for an organization that offers mental health support.
Right, correct.
I wanted to take it down to the next level. So we've got the organizational response to this. At a personal level, I'm a manager, I'm a supervisor, I'm a peer. What are the skills that I need to support myself in the workplace and to support the people around me in the workplace? What are you seeing?
The biggest thing that I'm seeing, again, is the curiosity of two things. One is I've noticed some things about myself and I'm taking care of me. And then the other question I've had people ask me, is it okay for me to share my story? And if I do share my story, my experiences, how does that affect my team? And the thing that I've shared with leaders and managers is that while it might feel very vulnerable to do that, you'd be amazed at the connection and the deeper level of relationships that managers and leaders are making with employees, because then it shows that it's okay for me too. I know that you probably, everybody's heard about the phrase, it's okay not to be okay. So if a managers and leaders do more than just lead about task and strategy. We all know that they set the tone for the environment. But if a manager and a leader appears to be invincible, that doesn't really provide a space for an employee when they're not feeling very well, or they're not in a good space to raise their hand and say, you know what, I'm having a challenge today. But if a leader comes in and says, you know what, I'm actually having a challenge today and I'm going to be present as much as I can. I'm being transparent because I want you to know that if you ever have that challenge too, or a similar situation, I'm here to support you. So the skills are, where can you be vulnerable? How can you walk the talk? I mean, I hate to use, lingo and phrases, but it's taking the walking the talk to a deeper level. Compassion and understanding, active listening. What do people really want? People want to be heard and validated. So if a manager has never been in a situation before where they've actually had to be active listening to be fully present with someone who's sharing with them and to validate. A question that somebody can ask is, are you looking for solutions or support? That's that is a question that any manager or anyone even here can ask when someone comes to you. Are you looking for support or solutions? Because that then tells the person that I want to be fully present with you and I want to meet your needs. Because has anybody ever here met with somebody and you just want to talk and they're already telling you what you should be doing? And everyone just closes off. It's like, I want you to listen to me, which is why I think that some hairstylists and bartenders, they'll say, you know what, sometimes I feel like I'm a therapist because people tell me all kinds of stuff. But what are they really doing? They're listening.
So, I mean, I love that you talked about listening, vulnerability, compassion, and empathy. These are not skills that everybody has, right? I mean, these are not things that a lot of people know how to do. And I'm wondering if you're seeing training, or, kind of like, I know that empathy, like there's research that says empathy can actually be trained. How you can be, have healthy boundaries and be empathic, without succumbing to empathy fatigue. I know there are trainings in deep listening. Are you seeing companies looking into those? Are you seeing people taking advantage of them?
What I'm seeing is that there's more questions being asked about what does this stuff mean? So like, for example, what does emotional availability mean? And I find it's fascinating. Again, I kid you not, 9 conversations. The things that came up were about, talk with me about what does it mean to be heart-centered? What does that mean? Okay, well, it can mean a lot of different things, but this is what my understanding of the practice of being heart-centered and heart-based. What does emotional availability mean? How do you be present with that? Some people are afraid of their emotions because they themselves didn't get it. So why it's so complicated is you mentioned earlier about we take care of ourselves, and then when we take care of ourselves, then how does that development with myself then reflect back to the services and the support I can provide to my team? You'd be surprised where there are leaders. I mean, I can think of a situation right now where there was a leader that was completely closed off with his emotions. It was one of these situations where if he didn't get assistance with some consultant and it didn't stick, he wasn't going to be employed. And, he was very, I don't want to say abrasive, but, the language was a little bit rough around the edges, which is interesting because I'm going to segue on something else here. One of these folks I had the conversation with last week, shared with me that he had been asking other consultants the same questions that he was asking me about understanding what mental wellness meant in the organization, as well as being in touch with your feelings and what does fully present mean. And his response to me was that he had asked other people and they were more rough around the edges, but I wasn't. And I thought that was really fascinating feedback, because imagine a leader being vulnerable, going out there with good intention, with trying to understand and gather this information so he could make a decision for his organization, and was met with this rough around the edges. We always remember how people make us feel. So when we're doing this work, there needs to be another pulse on how are we making people feel?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which then can link back to DEI and B initiatives.
Will you say just a little bit more about that? And then I want to ask a question about HIPAA.
Yeah, for sure. So the belonging piece, some people, some organizations right now are focused on DEI initiatives. And what does DEI mean? How can they integrate DEI within their organizational strategy and culture? And what I challenge people to think about, and I'm smiling as I say this, because sometimes, I have to be very mindful on where are people at, and the way that you preface and phrase a question is, if your organization had a belonging culture, how does DEI come along with that? If you do DEI initiatives, but there's no belonging piece, do you really think people feel like they belong in your organization? I'll give you an example. How many times have you been invited to a party and you show up? Everybody gets the invitation. Everybody knows that maybe I don't eat, I don't know, lima beans. So we're not going to have lima beans. And I walk in and somebody says, hi, Deb, it's nice to meet you. And then after that, I'm left on my own. Do I really feel like I belong there? Yes, I got the invitation. Yes, they were mindful about the lima beans. Again, this all goes back to illustrations of DEI. I mean, I'm making it very neutral here, but everyone understands the premise. But I don't feel like I belong because then I was left. Do you think I'm going to want to come back? No. Years ago, we did Welcome Wagon. Years ago, also, the onboarding process was to help the employee acclimate to how we do things around here, as well as to welcome them into the organization. But those are singular events. They're not sustainable. It's not that they can't be. And again, that could be another question to an organization. How are we initiating belonging in our organization? But then again, the flip side is employees have given feedback that they don't want to be forced to have relationships with people at work. So like team building exercises, oh my gosh, this feels forced. You can't force these things. It has to be a natural desire to connect with people. And how do you do that?
Yeah. And then I'm thinking as well in terms of having a natural desire to communicate your health and well-being needs at work. I think we were talking when we were preparing, my husband's like, I'm so not going to tell anybody at work if I'm feeling, depressed. Like that's not going to be something I'm going to bring to my boss. And some of that has to do with just an individual's openness to being vulnerable in that situation, but there's also privacy issues. And so where does privacy come in, and protecting people's privacy at work?
That's another good question. So when organizations are putting together their mental health and well-being programs, they need to look at, HIPAA regulations as well as the disability laws. And then there's another one that I wrote down here, because there are certain regulations that we need to be mindful of to make sure that we're not asking people to disclose information about themselves. So for example, with the American Disability Act, we need to make sure that, again, the services are taking in consideration accommodations without actually asking, oh, hey, do you have an accommodation need? So and these types of regulations then link back to continuous improvement analyses, because what we're doing is we're trying to figure out how effective programs are for people, at the same time maintaining privacy for folks. I apologize for not actually saying what the acronym DEI meant. Thank you very much, Kelly, for putting that in the chat. Diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. And if you want to know some research that you can look at, Abraham Maslow, I mean, years ago, he has the hierarchy of needs. The DEI and the B part, the belonging piece, is rooted in Maslow's work. So if people are looking for evidence-based practices, even though it was, constructed, decades ago, it's even more applicable today. I think Maslow's vision was really talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, the belonging piece.
That's fascinating. So I have one more question for you, and then I would like to shift gears and talk to everyone in the room who's willing to chat, and we can use a chat box as well. Like, you don't have to talk out loud if you'd rather just listen, or if you have questions via chat. But I do want to ask one more question of you, Dr. Deb. What is the role of a company in not just making sure that people aren't falling through the cracks in terms of their mental health, but in terms of creating an environment that is actively supportive of someone's well-being? Like, I am better for being able to come to work. Like, what do you see there? What do you think?
I love this question, and why I really love it and I appreciate it is because when I did my doc research, one of the questions that was very provoking, and I'm laughing because I look at those questions, it's not to provoke to get a reaction, it's to provoke to get thinking, to get us to really think about things instead of being on autopilot, like, oh, I did it, so what more do you want? What I wanted to know was if an employee, a person, was healthy before they accepted a job, and then in their job, not necessarily the task, it wasn't like they're working on a line floor, a mechanic shop, right? Just being in the environment of the organization, that their health started changing and they got a physical ailment, like hypertension, for example. I wanted to know, were there any legalities? So were there any cases that were an employee took litigation against their employer? They were healthy, now they're not. Were there? And yes, there were. So then I thought to myself, what does it take for an organization to say we have a moral responsibility to provide a healthy work environment? And what I'm curious to know is that we spend a third of our lifetime in an organization. So does an organization have a moral responsibility, and whose definition of morality is it? But again, I ask the question when people look at me, like leaders say, well, that's not, our business. We're not in the health. And because sometimes you do get that pushback. Then I ask them the question, but why not? Why not? Because there are organizations that are. So if we create a healthy work culture, and organizations might say, we don't know how to do it, but the information's there, then it becomes the question, why not? Now, can organizational leaders honestly answer that question if they choose not to? I'm not sure that they can. I'm not sure that they're willing to.
Well, it feels like the changing tides, like you said, someone's going to build it bigger, better. Like, even if it's not from an altruistic place or enlightened, and what's that phrase? But like, they're just people might not stick around.
Huge risk.
Yes.
Strategically, there's a huge risk. And why I say that is because we've already seen that pattern play out throughout history. There are organizations, I mean, look at Sears. Sears thought that nobody could ever compete with Sears. Sears isn't even around today. Right. We have Amazon. I met with a leader today, and I know, Jill, you and I have shared this little thing I'm going to say next, is that the thought was, he said he did not care about going to Mars. What he cared about was leaving a legacy where his people, could be in a work culture that was healthy. And how can I do that? How can I ensure that my people know that they can come to work every day and be inspired and they want to be there? So these are some amazing shifts. It's amazing because these conversations are happening. Leaders are saying, and they have their own reflective moments of, what am I all about? What
Right.
legacy do I want to leave behind? What do
Yeah.
I want to be known for? And they're looking at mental health and mental well-being. And it's more than I have an EAP program. They want to know that they're meeting people's needs. And talk about the inclusion piece. They're also, I love this piece too. I want to just share real quickly. They're looking at the outliers. So usually when we look at research, we look at like, the cluster of things that work. Okay, what's everybody doing that we know that's effective? And then people move on. But leaders are having this conversation of, who's the person where it's not? Why isn't it working for this person? What can we do to make sure that it meets everybody's needs? And one of the things that I also am seeing are the conversations that leaders are having with their employees to say, we want to do this and we want to get it right. We want to get it right. And right means for our organization, and our organization means you. I kid you not, the last 2 weeks, I feel like I've ran a marathon because of these wonderful conversations. And it's open. It's
Yeah.
open. They're asking, like, how can we do this? What are some other things that we can think about? How do we integrate it with our strategy? How can we integrate it with marketing? How can we integrate it with recruiting? How can we integrate it with onboarding? I mean, it's a really inspiring, just fascinating and amazing time right now. And I wish that these conversations were more posted on LinkedIn, because what I keep seeing on LinkedIn, for example, are all the things that are going wrong.
Right.
There's a
Well,
beauty about what's going wrong, though. What's going wrong tells us what's not working. So
yes.
now we can move from the super saturation of, yes, we already know the super saturation data about toxic leaders. We already know that. So again, it goes back to the, why isn't something being done about it? And if an organization chooses not to, then just own it and say, we're never going to do anything about it. But I can tell you right now, again, history repeats itself. There are more conversations with leaders that want to make a positive difference.
I think that is an excellent place to leave this part of the conversation. That's inspiring. That's hopeful. And thank you very much for sharing your insights and your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks for having me.